The city that I live in is old, not just by the date of settlement, even before the Spanish conquest, but from the time that the first men sealed the earth with the blood of the other tribes. The Huachichil tribe were sanguinary people, loathing the sight of newcomers. So by the time the Spanish came to this territory, bloodshed was on their mind. The fight was bloody during the day. The desperate screams of native women and children shot and pierced by the Spanish swords, mutilated soldiers moaning on their deathbed. During the night, the war drums, chants, dancing and the wailing of the morning were the only sounds to be heard. As history books now tell us, they were finally conquered with disease, oozing welts and delirious fevers, somehow healed by salvation of the Lord and God of the Christians, and some mysterious white powders under the care of priests brought over the sea to care for the sick. The Huachichil were cunning people who would not give up easily. The shamans of the tribe gathered and are said to have cursed those who, at that time, and those who would walk this land in the future, to be rich but miserable, never at peace. If you walk the downtown streets today, and you can feel the spirits of the past, the anger and the sadness that seems to follow each of the inhabitants of the city, who go about with their heads bent down in the absence of a smile. Children are sullen. The young and adults are only gregarious when drunk, a pastime all too common in this city, and the old spend their days at church with their thumb and index finger indented with the shape of rosary beads, praying for the eternal rest they all seem so desperate for. As much as Town Hall tries its best to renovate the dilapidated historical buildings, in a matter of months they fall into disrepair again, paint peeling, pieces of walls tumbling to the ground as people walk by, sidestepping the stone, not even bothering to glance up to see where it had fallen from. The air is heavy as the hearts of the people who live here. As a child, my family and I would visit this city, back when it was still a town, during summer vacation. I remember being about 8 years old enough to walk to the nearest corner store by myself, but too young to be out alone at night. My grandmother, aunts and uncles will tell me that the Cuco, a man who stole children away to an unknown destiny, would take me and I would never see them again. A horrifying idea for such a young child. So I was very respectful of the curfew. As soon as the sun started to set, I made my way back to my grandmother's house. One late afternoon, I'd overstayed a visit to an elder neighbor's house a few blocks away, a lady who told me stories of her own childhood at the family farm, which I found fascinating, being a city dweller, and this was new to me. She started to doze off in the middle of a story, so I decided to tiptoe out of the house, closing the door behind me. As I turned to step off the porch, I was confronted by a dark sky and a silent street. I panicked, not knowing what I feared more, the Cuco or the anger of my family. Regardless, I had to get home. Stepping onto the sidewalk, I saw that the 2 blocks that I had to walk were dark. Streetlights were off for some reason. A few old crumbling houses on the way looked even darker. A tunnel of darkness. A tunnel I had to walk through to get to the streetlight that marked the corner I had to turn to get to my grandmother's. Once there, I'd be safe. I mustered all the courage a little child could. I clenched my hands into fists and started to walk at a fast pace. The first block was silent. No people, no cars, no dogs or night sounds. I got to the corner, stopped and ran across the street. I continued quickly, knowing I was almost there. Suddenly, to my right, from between the panels of a broken door, I felt a gust of icy cold wind. I stopped and turned to see where it had come from. It was the middle of summer. The air had been hot and sticky. There, within the frame of the broken door, stood a man. Beyond him, I saw the house had no roof. I looked back at him. He smiled a crooked smile. Black and yellow uneven teeth were revealed. "Hello, my name is Don Quintero. What is your name?" he said. I snapped out of my trance and ran the rest of the way to my grandmother's house, slamming the door behind me, startling my parents and the rest of the family who gathered in the dining room. Needless to say, I was grounded for the rest of the week. I burst into tears and ran into the guest room. A few minutes later, my grandmother came into the room with a dinner plate and asked me what had happened. I told her, and she started to lose colour. She became very pale, and worry started to settle in her eyes. She told me she would speak to my parents. Everything would be fine tomorrow, and I would be able to go out with my cousins. She kissed my forehead and left me to eat my now cold food. I stopped halfway. I noticed that the laughing and chatting of the adults had died down to whispers. I silently walked to the corner of the dining room, out of their sight, and listened. My grandmother spoke of a time during the Revolution when the men would hide their wives and children in the cellars and basements for fear of them being raped or taken away to be used as practice targets by the rebel soldiers that passed through the town on their way to the camps. Money and valuables were buried in the floors or sealed in the walls of the homes for safekeeping. She was a child herself during this time and had experienced being locked in the cellar. Fear was part of everyday life. The men in the neighborhood and surrounding blocks gathered in the afternoons to discuss what could be done, exchanging suggestions and alerting each other when food was available at the stores. They would go in teams and bring enough for everyone's families. In desperate times, friends and acquaintances were there for each other. But there was one man, always taking more than his fair share. If a whole family was killed, he would look for and steal their money and valuables, taking them home never to be seen again. Well, the men started to shun him, fearful of his greed. Once a talkative man, now he could be heard in his home pacing back and forth behind his wood-panelled door. As fate would have it, by the end of the revolution he'd been killed, his body left to rot. No friends or family to claim him, no one to give him a Christian burial, no knowledge of where his money was. His name was Luis Quintero del Rio. Yes, Don Quintero died rich, but miserable. "May God have mercy on his soul," she said, crossing herself. I could hear my own heart beat pounding in my ears. I started to shake. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I vomited, loudly enough to bring my mother to my side. My grandmother was horrified and asked me how long I'd been standing there. I told her the truth. She picked me up, took me to bed, yelled out for someone to bring a fresh egg, and started to make passes over me with the egg, mumbling words I barely understood. My mother stood there wide-eyed. She'd heard of the ritual of curing the evil eye, but could not understand what it had to do with me. Stomach flu, or maybe the cold food, but anything but this ridiculous evil eye nonsense. My grandmother finished and asked for a glass half filled with water. She broke the egg into it, and the yolk came out blood red, with 2 white spots. The eyes, my grandmother said. I was given some tea and started to feel sleepy. My mother in a chair next to my bed, my grandmother in a rocking chair humming a lullaby. They thought I'd fallen asleep. My mother asked her what had happened. My grandmother continued the story that I had interrupted. Don Quintero's house stood abandoned for several decades, standing the passage of time pretty well, until in the 1930s, 3 young ladies, the youngest barely 15 years old, moved into it. They had lost their parents to an accident and had to sell the family home to pay debts and make ends meet. The town had kindly allowed them to stay in the abandoned house until they could make a stable life for themselves. The house was dirty and dusty, curtains in tatters, some broken furniture that needed to be repaired. So the sisters agreed that, while the 2 older ones went out daily to do odd jobs, the youngest could stay behind and try to make a home out of the house. The first few nights, noises could be heard coming from the living room. Slow steps as if someone was dragging their feet, or a chair would be found out of its place. The sisters thought it was because it was an old house, much of it made of wood, and these noises were part of it cooling down in the night air. By the following week, the noises could be heard during the day. The young girl would run out to the front door and stay there until the older sisters came back at sundown. Soon the older sisters noticed that the young one was developing dark circles under her eyes. Her smile was gone, her head bent, and she was rapidly losing weight. She insisted everything was well, not wanting to worry her sisters until it became too much to bear, she confessed that she'd been hearing the voice of a man that said, "Don Quintero is here. Don Quintero has to leave." But the house was empty. The sisters, fearful of being involved in unholy gossip, decided that when the young one heard the man, she should call out to him and ask, "What do you want? Do you need prayers? How can we help you?" When the moment came, she crossed herself several times, prayed to the Lord in heaven, and asked the questions, held her breath, and waited. The voice answered, 3 tiles to the north of where the wing-backed chair stands, 1 meter into the entrails of the earth, you will find 3 wooden chests. Use all the contents. Use each and every cent, so I may find peace. And then she fainted. By sundown, the older ones came home to find their sister on the floor, and the chair moved to a different place. Smelling salts were found, and the young girl awoke. She told her sisters what the man's voice had told her, and they began to search. They dug all night, till the top of the 3 chests could be seen. Once opened, they revealed coins, jewelry, and other trinkets made of pure gold. The sisters embraced each other, shedding tears of joy. No more worries, no more working for others. They would have comfortable lives. The house was purchased from the town and repaired. With a new business set up and some money in the bank, life had changed for them. But it was short-lived. Once the need for spending the contents of the chest was done, one had been left untouched, placed back in the hole in the floor, covered with dirt, and the floor tiles replaced, left there for safekeeping. Time went by, and the voice was heard again. "Don Quintero is here. Don Quintero has to leave. You have not spent the last cent. I do not have peace." His voice followed them day and night, torturing them. They confided in me, my grandmother said. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had inherited the family home, this house, and remembered the name from my childhood. Our neighbor from around the corner. The name of the man that had been shunned for his greed. I told them to seek for a priest, to have the house blessed, to bring in an exorcist, but they did nothing, not wanting to be the talk of the town. Within the month, they were found by a neighbor, dead in their beds, their wrists slit, an empty bottle of pills and a bottle of wine on their nightstands. They had been rich, but miserable. "But don't worry," my grandmother told my mother. "The child is fine. I'll call upon the angels to look over her." Silence fell between my mother and my grandmother. They both went off to bed. I lay there, thinking of the ghost of a man that called out to me. "Hello, my name is Don Quintero. What is your name?" Not even in death had he found peace. The last cent had not been spent, and he was still looking for someone to do so. Sleep started to overcome me, and then the dreams began. Stories of a city that knows no peace. A rich city. A city of misery.
Hey there. Thank you so much for taking the time to drop by and listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me. I put a lot of time and effort into making these videos, so it's nice to know that there's someone out there listening. Do me a little favor, would you? Click that like button, leave a comment, and if you really feel like it, why not subscribe too? Okay, happy tales everyone. See you soon.